All right. I don't like when I don't have my dual screens because I can't cheat. I don't have I keep toggling back and forth on this laptop. But should we get started? I was just checking. I don't think I have anything from the other two
See,
board members.
Nikki indicated that she's not able to attend.
Okay. Nikki, and hopefully we'll get others that'll join later. So I would say let's get the board meeting going here. Let's call MCD to God, I can't talk today. Let's start this board meeting. I'll do just a roll call. Corky.
Here.
Darian.
Totally here.
Ken Anderton's here, and I don't see anybody else. So MCD board is in session. All right. What do we got on the agenda, Wendy?
The first item is a consideration of the holiday schedule change.
Okay, is there a presentation for that?
Tracy Almeida will be speaking to you about this.
Hi. There's not a presentation. I was just going to walk through. It was part of the board packet, I believe. There was a memo included. But so a little bit of background. MCD currently observes 9 holidays, and for the most part, they're aligned with the federal holidays, except for Juneteenth and Columbus Day. And so in the past, like 2 years, there's been discussion at the district and also requests from staff for Juneteenth to be added as a holiday, especially with all the work that's been done in terms of DEI. Jim has done a great job of acknowledging the day and allowing people like an hour or two to reflect on the holiday and the meaning behind it. But we would like at this time to recommend that the board consider a motion to adopt the Multnomah County elections holiday so that we can mirror the MCDD holiday list with that holiday list. And if we do adopt it, that would add Juneteenth as a holiday to our list. The cost of adding the additional holiday was factored into the budget that Lori will be presenting on later today. But yeah, I think it's really important to our staff, and we've shared about it and we've talked about it. So this is something that I think now was the perfect time to bring it forward. And with it coming up, it would be great for the board to make a decision.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just getting requests from different staff about different holidays and whether we would add them or not. And I don't really want to spend a lot of landowner capacity on debating holiday additions or not. So I thought it was potentially useful to just align with the largest jurisdiction in our district and just try and follow their lead. And I believe the language is written that if Multnomah County changed something, we would then correspondingly update our schedule as well. So that was sort of my intent, to avoid a lot of one-offs and try and align with what others are doing.
And when we went to look at Multnomah County, the calendar that's readily publicly available is the elections division, which is why we specified the elections division.
They have different ones for different unions and so on, and we decided to go with the most publicly visible one.
Great. Totally understand that. That makes a lot of sense in terms of trying to align with other public agencies, and with Multnomah County being one of the larger ones. I think that's great. Any discussions for the board members? To me, it seems really straightforward, and I appreciate it. I'm now back organized. I have my Adobe working. It wasn't letting me open back the agenda, so now I've got it here. It's on page 2. I think the resolution of the packet. Could I get somebody that would do a resolution?
I think we're just asking for a motion.
A motion, I mean. My choice of words are bad today. I was
You're
forgetting
good.
what roll call was.
I don't see it verbatim on here, but I will move that the district adopt the holiday schedule of the Multnomah County Elections Office as the district's official holiday schedule.
Do I have a second? I could read Corky's lips and he said he seconded it. All right, will this do?
Thank
roll
you.
call.
So I'm trying to get that open too. So I'm about 30 seconds behind you, Ken.
Do you want to take, if you haven't had a chance to review it, we're happy to give you more time too. I don't want to push
No,
this.
it's okay. I'm okay.
I looked at it. It's just a matter of my Adobe would not open it for some reason, and that's my guide to how to run the meeting. So it threw me off a little bit. Let's just do a quick motion or a quick roll call vote. Darren,
Aye.
Corky,
Aye.
and Ken Anderton votes aye. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, guys.
Yay. Thank you. Excited to share it with staff.
Thanks, Tracy, for your work on it.
Juneteenth is a cool and interesting holiday. So this could be fun. I like it.
Yeah, totally agree. And now, Lori, you are up, I believe, on the budget update.
All right, let me share my screen. Okay, so today we are going to review the proposed budget for MCDD for fiscal year 2023-2024. We're not asking for any action from the board today. We will be returning on May 23rd, so we can review any proposed changes or updates. And then in the time between this meeting and May 23rd, if you have questions, please send those via email to Jim and I, and we'll create a Q&A document to share with all of the board members. We will be presenting the budget for adoption at the format meeting on June 20th. So you'll have another opportunity to meet with us and ask questions or discuss the budget before we get to that June 20th meeting. So this is just our first touch. So here's our agenda for today. We'll start off our presentation with Jim Middaugh sharing an overview of the budget. Then we'll take a look at key financial issues that should be considered in our budget process. We will also take a look at the projections for ending fund balance for each district, and we'll review the proposed budget summary, walk through the revenues, personnel costs, and materials and services proposed. And finally, we'll take a look at the capital projects in a summary and give you an opportunity to ask any questions you may have thus far related to the budget. I will say we've shared the MCDD budget with all of our districts so that our board members have an opportunity to take a look at it. We want to be transparent with this information and provide them with some insight as to what's happening here at MCDD since we're providing services to them. With that, I will hand it over to Jim.
Thanks, Lori, and thanks board members for your previous direction. I believe this budget reflects what you directed us to present to you. I want to remind you there will be more time for your consideration of our proposed budget and more time for questions and answers, and we want to ensure we do our best to answer all of your questions. I'd like to highlight just a few things. This budget does give us the ability to continue implementing the ORS 550 mandates and trying to advance the work of consolidating the legacy districts and standing up the urban district. I also want to flag for you that when we first presented the budget forecast, we shared with you some challenges related to funding the urban district work. Thanks to Lori's amazing work and support from the executive team, we have tightened our belts considerably. We have reduced spending in the current year to increase our year-end balance. We have left positions that are currently vacant open to increase our cash. And we're proposing a budget with no new FTE increases and modest increases in materials and services and other expenses that reflect the increase in inflation that our region has been experiencing recently. And last, I just want to stress again that we are in a challenging situation time-wise. We don't need to rush, but we do need to be quick. The legacy district's budget and financial capabilities are challenged by compression and increasing costs and the lack of ability to generate capital. And so before I started, the boards had been set on a trajectory to spend down reserves, and we continue in that vein in several of the districts. And Lori will get more into this, but I do want to remind you that there does need to be some urgency in trying to move forward. And we believe this budget provides our ability to continue to do that without creating a big subsidy from MCDD to the urban. It will mean that there will be less resources available to the urban, and we'll be working closely with the urban board to manage expectations and resources consistent with adopted budgets. So with that, I want to appreciate that Lori has worked through 7 different budgets and has done an excellent job of that with a lot of support from her finance team and the rest of the staff who are tracking expenses and feeding cost projections into Lori's excellent work. So thanks to the staff, thanks to the board for the earlier guidance, and we look forward to addressing any questions or information needs you have so that you can feel confident in June adopting this budget. Thank you. Lori?
Thank you, Jim. So as we review the proposed budget, board members should also be considering key financial issues that MCDD is facing. We're continued to be faced with challenges related to compression of our assessment revenues. I do want to stop here and just note that we are doing some legal review of the compression on the government entity side. So if there is a government entity that owns property, we've been working with outside counsel and with legal counsel at Multnomah County to take a look at how they're administering those calculations to determine whether those calculations are accurate. So if you think back to when we reviewed the revised forecast, MCDD did have a significant increase in compression this year based upon some changes in administration that occurred at Multnomah County. So we have not given up on that discussion, but it has been a very active discussion, and we're working through legal channels to try to determine what is the appropriate way for those revenues to be administered. We are hopeful that we'll see some improvements there and that we will not be experiencing the level of compression that we are now. But this budget does make the assumption that compression will continue at the levels that we are experiencing currently. So there may end up being some capacity there, but we did not want to make any assumptions that things were going to change until we knew for sure where we were at. Second on the list here is that staff costs and overhead, if they are not covered by the urban budget for work that we're doing towards consolidation to the urban district, would fall to MCDD. We're feeling better in this area as well because we have found some savings that will carry forward into the new year on the urban district. So we were able to increase the expenditure budget on the urban district for staff costs and also increase the related revenue that gets recorded on MCDD to cover those costs as well. So we are feeling like we are in a better position now than we were initially in that area. But as Jim referenced, we're going to have to very closely manage the work that staff are performing in relation to the urban district to be able to stay within the confines of that budget. So we will continue to work on that and continue to share with you where we're at with that as we go through the year.
Well,
And
Lori, do you mind if I jump in on that real quick?
please jump in.
Okay, thanks. Because I think some of this, I raised some of this before too, and so it's probably partly my fault. I think the concern, and I guess I'm wanting to get a better sense of how this is being handled. The concern isn't so much the money that's spent, although of course that is a concern. It's more a matter of tracking it and knowing that indeed that is an expense that really should be paid for by the urban district rather than it just kind of being swept under the rug and paid by MCD. I want to make sure we know that we're covering that cost for the urban district if that's the case. How do we track that?
We staff actually do timekeeping each week to track the hours that they're working on each of the individual districts. And so we have an accounting by staff person for all the hours that they're working. And we are not in a position where we're asking them not to report those hours. So we will continue to be able to monitor where we're at with the hours that they're working versus what we have in the budget. So, and that is information that we'll be able to share with you on a regular basis so that you're aware
That's what
of
I'm
where
getting at. I
things
just
are
want to make sure that
progressing.
you're in a position to be able to tell us, hey, guess what? Here's, X number of dollars that's in a perfect world, the urban district would be paying for. They're not paying for it. It's falling on MCD, but that's the amount. I want you to be aware. You're going to be able to tell us that as we go through the year.
Yes.
Great. All right.
Yes,
Thank you.
that's correct. And I
covered.
think part of the challenge with the current fiscal year is that the urban budget only accounted for a portion of the staff time that we were
Right.
anticipating to incur. So that led to some challenges this year.
And
Yeah.
Lori, is there a list of FTEs that are fully funded by urban, or are they all just partially funded?
They're partially funded, and I do have that information. I can send it out. I shared it with the urban board last week when I presented the budget, but there is a list both of the folks that are directly charged to the urban district, and that there's a portion of several of us that are directly charged. And then we do have in our budget the number of hours that we've allocated by position type that we'll be charging to the urban board as well. So I can share that with you all. Wendy, if you don't mind just making a note for me so that I don't forget, that would be great.
And
Thanks,
I
Lori.
think
That would be helpful.
Sure.
one of the challenges folks like I have, I'm allocated 25% to the urban district and my time ebbs and flows. I'm not tracking specific time to the urban, but we could make arrangements. But again, we're doing our best to really manage to that urban budget. And we've made some changes in direction to staff about who's participating, and we're going to try and monitor very closely the work that's assigned to staff to stay within that allocation.
And Jim, I'm not going to speak for other board members, but as far as I'm concerned, I mean, if I were in your shoes, I don't want to be tracking every hour either, so I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for a good faith estimate, both proactive and then retro, afterwards too, saying, okay, let's adjust that. We just good faith, give me, we don't need to be exact, and not what I don't want to get into is, well, the urban district can't afford that, so I'm not going to report my hours that I spent on that. Instead, right. I really want that reported estimate to be honest. And then if MCD, may very well say, well, we're going to cover it. That's okay, but I want to do that. I want to know that that's what I'm doing, rather than it just kind of being swept aside and not reported.
Yeah, thank you, Corky. And I just wanted to make sure, in the spirit of transparency, I wanted you to know that some of us are directly allocated, and so it may not be as precise as it might be in a public sector setting or a private sector setting where you're billing to different clients or something like that. But we can do
the same thing here. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Again, we want to be really honest with you about what we're doing, and if you want us to do it differently, we'll do it differently. But didn't want to have any misunderstanding. Thanks.
All right, and then the last item here for us to keep in mind is that the district is facing reduced fund balances and cash flow issues. We'll talk about that in a minute here, but it is definitely something that we need to be aware of and plan for. So admittedly, the proposed budget is less than ideal because of these things, but it's our best option given the limits to funding that are available for the district. If I were to look at a common message for our budget season, it would be that the temporary funding mechanisms that we have for the districts are unsustainable. So let's take a look now at the projections for operating fund balances for each of our legacy districts. So as we look toward integration of the districts into the new urban district, our fund balance projections are a good way to understand timelines and the importance of moving forward with the decisions facing the urban board. This chart shows the projected fund balances for each district. Should real life follow the numbers in the budget, which we all know is not necessarily the case, but it's the best estimate that we have to date. So this chart shows the projected fund balances for each district. And the information that we're reviewing here aligns with the projections provided by our former budget director, Casey. For most of the districts, the numbers we need to be aware of are those dollars available for general operations. These are our undesignated and operating reserves, which on this chart are in the blue. Okay, so for MCDD, current operations are supported through drawdowns on operating fund balances. MCDD will not have enough resources in fiscal year 24-25 to continue operating at the same level they're operating at today. Additionally, because a portion of the funds are restricted, we'll need to consider interim financing for operational funding, such as paying payroll for the early months in the fiscal year before assessments are collected. In general, we need around $3 million in unrestricted or operating funds to operate until assessment revenues are collected. If actual financial results of the district align with the budget, we'll have just over $1.1 million in operating funds at the beginning of July 2024. I just will stop and say that it is not unusual for a government entity in Oregon to have to do that interim borrowing to keep going during the time period between the beginning of the fiscal year and when they collect property taxes. Our assessments are collected on the same schedule as property taxes, are part of the property tax bill. So what we're seeing is kind of a normal occurrence for government entities. It is new for us. We have always had fund balances, operating fund balances, to allow us to get through that kind of desolate period between July and November when those collections start coming in. We are getting to the point in the age of the organization where we don't have those sorts of dollars available in the operating funds to be able to carry us through that period where we don't have our significant funding coming in. For Penn 1, they continue to operate at a deficit, which is being covered by the city of Portland and has been for quite some time. So the city is committed to help us keep operating this district and pay for our necessary costs, and they pay for the impacts of compression through contribution and support of both operations and capital spending. Penn 2 is also supporting current operations using some drawdowns of operating fund balance. Penn 2 will not have enough resources in fiscal year 24-25 to continue operating at the same level they're operating at today. STIC is able to fund their operations without drawing down on their fund balance. However, the challenge for STIC is on the capital side, where there are estimated to be over $12 million in capital costs for the replacement of the pump station that would fall in fiscal year 2027 if we're not able to move forward with the PMLS project. That capital project is within the definition of PMLS, but we're always talking about Plan B and what happens if we don't get moving forward with the consolidation of the districts, the issuance of the GEO bonds, and moving forward on PMLS. They will have a challenge of needing to come up with that funding to be able to make that replacement. The urban district is budgeted to spend down all of its fund balance by the end of fiscal 2024 and is operating basically on the dollars that they're borrowing from the city of Portland. So $1.2 million a year that we have available in operating borrowing from the city of Portland. This fund balance information is consistent with what was provided by Casey previously. The transition to the urban district and the implementation of new funding mechanisms will allow us to address these funding shortfalls. In your package, you'll find the proposed budget document for MCDD, and this is a summary of that budget. On the resource side of the equation, we start with $5.9 million of carry forward funding from the beginning balance. This is lower than we projected in the forecast we presented to you earlier, as we've updated our projections and anticipate an increase in spending through the end of fiscal year 22-23. The proposed budget anticipates an assessment rate increase of 9% with a 14% tax compression rate. We're assuming a 5% loss to discounts, adjustments, and delinquencies, and we'll talk in more detail about assessment revenues on a future slide. Contract revenues include dollars received from our other districts for administrative and maintenance fixed fees and other work performed on capital projects, stormwater fee revenues from the city of Portland, administrative staff reimbursements from JCA and the urban district, and from other maintenance services with local government partners. Due to funding limitations on the urban district, the charges budgeted for staff support will need to continue to monitor. As we talked about there, we were able to get an increase there. And so we are optimistic that we are going to cover costs, but we will continue that conversation throughout the year so that you're aware of where we stand with that. Other revenue includes $40,000 in interest earnings on funds that are in the local government investment pool, $4,000 in development fee revenues, grant revenue supporting the PMLS local match contributions is $323,000, and grant revenue for FEMA certification projects is $744,000, and other FEMA grant revenue is $88,000. Some of these grants we've got some new information on, and so there may be some changes in the grant budgets when we look at the budget in May, but for now, that is what is included there. And I'm thinking the $88,000 grant actually got rejected, so that you will see that one go away. And the related costs. Personal services of $7.1 million support staffing costs, including wages, medical, and other insurance benefits, employer taxes such as Social Security, Oregon PERS pension contributions, and employee support such as training. There are no new positions in the budget for fiscal year 23-24. Materials and services of $2.5 million includes system maintenance costs and operating supplies, non-capital projects, professional services, and administrative expenses. We have $2.3 million in the capital spending category for the proposed budget. And debt service reflects principal that's due to be paid on outstanding borrowing and the related interest that's accruing on those funds borrowed. And that was a capital borrowing. So we have some capital funds still remaining that are funding a portion of our capital spending. We anticipate that the remainder of those funds will be spent in 23-24. So our ending fund balance is at $3.7 million. $2.6 million of this is restricted for spending on capital assets. $1.1 million reflects 2.5 months of operating costs plus debt service payments due next year. As we noted previously, the remaining operating reserve will not provide the dollars needed to fund payroll costs early in fiscal year 24-25 while we're waiting for assessment payments. We anticipate the need to obtain interim financing to pay operating costs during the first several months of that fiscal year. Assessment payments normally begin to be collected in November and December. If we have a favorable outcome with the compression discussions, it's possible that we may be coming back in May and saying we're sitting in a better position with fund balance, yet to be seen. So fingers crossed on that. This chart shows the proposed revenue budget with assessments at $5.9 million. Contract revenues at $3.2 million and grants at $1.2 million. We'll look at the details behind the calculation of the assessment revenues on the next slide. This chart walks us through the calculation of the assessment revenues. We start with the total assessment from the 22-23 fiscal year of $6.5 million. The proposed budget includes a rate increase of 9%. And the 9% increase in rate brings us to a total assessment value of $7.1 million. Because of compression rates and collection rates that we'll discuss next, a 1% increase in an assessment rate actually provides an additional $53,000 in revenue collection. So as you're looking at this, if you wanted to say, well, why don't we do 10% instead of 9%? That's how many dollars you would get if you changed to that 9% rate to 10%. Okay, so at this point, we remove our direct billing from the calculations, and you'll see that added back in as we get further down in the calculation. There are some bills that can't be processed by the county, such as properties that are held by federal entities, because the county doesn't keep track of any sort of taxes for them. And so for those accounts, we bill them directly ourselves. So we take them out of the calculation at this point and then add them back in after the impact of compression, discounts, and collection rates. Compression is being estimated at 14%, which is reflective of our current experience with compression. As we discussed, this might get better if we can figure out the administration of those accounts that are held by government entities. This includes that new compression impact of partially exempt properties, such as those owned by the port that we experienced this year. So as you can see, we lose close to $1 million in compression for MCDD. Taxpayers receive a discount of 3% if they pay their tax bills, including assessments, by November 15th. Additionally, there are normally adjustments to our assessments each year, and not all assessments are collected in a timely manner. So we use a total estimate of 5% of assessments after compression to estimate the impact of discounts, adjustments, and those collectability issues. At this point, we add back our direct bills, which was at $99,000 above, along with payment by taxpayers of prior year balances and interest. So sometimes when folks don't pay in the year, they still pay us in the following years, or if the property sells, that outstanding tax amount gets included in the settlement of the sale of the property. So our estimate for total assessments collected is 5.9 million. So we start with that 7 million up at the top, but in reality, that equates to 5.9 million in assessment revenue. This slide shows us the breakdown of proposed expenditures by type. As you can see, personnel costs make up the largest part of MCDD's spending. Materials and services includes maintenance and supplies, projects and planning, contracts and agreements, professional services, and administrative expenses. We'll take a look at capital outlay on an upcoming slide, and debt service includes both interest and principal on our outstanding debt. The proposed budget for personnel costs is $7 million. This line item includes wages, benefits such as health insurance, retirement, employer taxes, and employee support such as training. The budgeted employee count is the same as fiscal year 22-23 with no new positions proposed. The budget for wages includes a 4% cost of living increase and a 2% merit adjustment. We did have some discussion with local partners to see what they were doing this year, particularly in this inflation environment, and it ran the gamut. Some of the union agreements at the port were upwards of 21% over the time period of their upcoming contract. Their non-union folks were right around this amount, and we were pretty consistent with our other local partners as well.
Well, Lori, excuse me. I mean, I presume you looked at 4%. Doesn't sound like it's keeping up with inflation.
It's not.
So why did we just pick 4%? Because that seemed to be what others were doing.
We did a comparative analysis with what others were doing. So that was part of it. And part of it is really our you can only spend what you have. And so our budget situation impacted that. And I will honestly say we had a great process this year where we developed the proposed budget. Our managers were involved. They submitted their needs. We had requests for positions. We actually originally started with this labor budget with a higher COLA, but as the exec team looked through it, there were some tough decisions we had to make, and we really had to make sure that we were balancing the budget without having an undue impact on the rate increase that's going to the property owners. So it was not an easy process, but certainly very thoughtful and we felt that this was consistent with our local partners, so we were really maintaining our pay equity analysis that was completed this year, but kept us in line with where we needed to be.
And I find that heartwarming. That is very encouraging to hear. And this may be a conversation for the board and Jim, but I would love to just take a quick look at what is the standard cost of living, just what are the numbers and how much more budget would be needed for that as opposed to the 4 plus 2% increase. I don't want to second guess. So if Jim says, no, I don't want to have that conversation, we've already, it's said and done and sealed and delivered, so be it. But I would be willing to take a look at that.
The CPI is running between 6 and 7% at this point. So with the merit, we're at 6. So I think it's keeping us close. The COLA piece of the increase is what shifts our pay ranges. So an employee in this situation, if their performance is meeting or exceeding expectations, would get both the 4%, that's the COLA that's shifting the range, as well as the 2% merit. So I think we're close. And I think it's very typical, particularly with Oregon local government entities, that their increases are somewhat behind the cost of living in general, but we try to keep them up as much as we can. So, and if you're looking at just a big picture, if you're looking at another 1%, that's another $700,000.
Okay, thanks. That's what I was wondering right there.
Yeah, I had a similar line of questioning, Lori, because it also costs a lot to recruit new employees, and so it's still a fairly hot job market. So just understanding what process you went through is really helpful, and understanding that you took that into consideration.
Definitely.
Two thoughts to offer. Thank you, board members, for raising this issue. I'm really grateful, and I know the entire staff is, so much gratitude. We're open to giving you those numbers and letting you decide. I also want to share that we have set up an exceeds category for exceptional performance. And I want to be really clear that exceptional means rare. It doesn't happen to very many people, but there is an opportunity for our stellar performers to have their director nominate them for an additional one-time bonus payment. We've allocated not a lot of money, again, because exceptional really needs to be exceptional. But that's another way that we can reward our top performers. So I just wanted to share that with you so you were aware. And I just would reinforce that the pay study we completed last fall demonstrated that we were really in a pretty good place within the market. So as much as it's awesome to have your support, I do think that we're in okay shape in most of our classifications. Another thought I might offer to the board would be for you to consider looking at potentially our operations team or some of our lower paid employees and see if there isn't a way to be a little bit more progressive in the way we think about merit. So just some thoughts.
And Jim, I would appreciate any suggestions you have on how we as a board can convey our appreciation for staff to look at this and say, yeah, we get it. We understand the situation we're in. I'm willing to take less than a true cost of living adjustment, because that's just, as I said earlier, it's heartwarming. And I want to make sure that they know that that's how we feel, regardless where we end up budget wise. That's an important message. So any suggestions you have on that, think it over and let us know.
All right, and we'll definitely share that with the team. And again, just want to express my appreciation for that sentiment. Thank you, Corky.
Yeah, and I would agree, because they're experiencing inflation, and also if you're trying to keep folks long-term, it impacts their long-term retirement as well, because that's how PERS is calculated, is last 3 years of retirement. So, and we've gone through a couple really big inflation years prior, were very predictable decade of 2-3%, CPI. So I appreciate the sensitivity to to the staff, and if you do have any, as you go through this, have a need to increase it, say by 1/4% or 0.5% or whatnot, to keep up with inflation, just let us know what that does to the budget, so totally supportive of looking at that.
There's an irony here that a staff that is willing to not get as much increase as they deserve are the ones that deserve it even more.
We may need you to attend some of the other district board meetings. I don't make light of that. They have legitimate questions about MCDD making decisions that impact their costs, which is why your budget was shared with them. So I just want you to know we're also thinking about our other boards that we need to work with and the expenses that ultimately flow to them as well. So that might be one thing that you all could do in your role as board members, is to engage in some outreach to your fellows on the other boards to let them know your sentiments.
Good idea.
And I appreciate the discussion. I appreciate the acknowledgement. I would just warn you to think back to what I said about a 1% increase in assessments is only $54,000. A 1% increase in staffing costs is $700,000. So as we look at ending fund balance and as we look at where we're at as an organization, we would need to find offsetting cuts in the budget to be able to balance this. It's a challenging year. So just keep that in mind. And I'm sure the staff are all going, why did you hire this person at this point? But I do want to make sure that you understand the numbers at play.
Yeah,
and actually what I'm more concerned about is next year.
Yep.
Yes, and I am more concerned about 24-25, which is why the push towards getting information to the urban board so that they can make some decisions.
And Lori, that's a really good point to show the basis of, 1% doesn't sound like a lot, but it is when you add it up in a totality. So appreciate you, talking about that, because we are a fairly small district and any little change impacts landowners a lot. And, but also, it impacts staff if we're unable to be competitive too. So it's a really challenging situation we're in right now. And I appreciate the transparency that you're showing.
Thank you. And just, for any staff that are listening, we did just go through the equity analysis. So, and we did learn that we were sitting in a pretty good place as far as pay equity. So we're feeling like this is a reasonable and fair direction for us to go for the upcoming year. As you noted, Corky, is going to be a little bit more challenging in 24-25. We will work on that one when we get there. The last thing that I want to say on this slide is new this year to the budget, the proposed budget book, is information, additional details on pay schedules. That's been included in the book, as well as positions that are included in the proposed budget. So you can go and see what our pay ranges will be under the 4% COLA increase.
And then just one last reminder that those pay scales were developed with the assistance of an outside consulting firm that works in the pay equity space. And they are narrower than the previous pay scales were, which I think gives us a little bit easier time in hiring and in managing expectations of employees. And we're more consistent with our competing agencies in terms of our pay grades and the ranges in those pay grades.
Thanks, that's really helpful. One quick question, do you happen to know what the average attrition rate is annually? And is that, I assume there's no assumption baked into the budgeting, because you would just assume refilled at the current level?
The budget does have some open positions. So we do have some current open positions, and we've continued those positions in the budget for the upcoming year. We don't make assumptions about attrition. It's really difficult with this small of an agency, because you could have a year where you have a couple people leave, and that's a high percentage, right? Because we have less than 40 employees. So we do, I would say attrition is sort of factored in, because we include costs in the budget for recruiting and advertising and training, those sorts of things that we need to do when we gain those new employees. So it's in there as well as those open positions, which we are currently recruiting for several. We have 2 that we're holding open at this point and really evaluating the level and the type of skill set that we need for the positions going forward.
And saving some cash.
And saving some cash in the meantime. All right, I will move forward. So this slide shows your breakdown of materials and services expenditures in the proposed budget. Levy and grounds maintenance of $254,000 includes pump station maintenance contracts of $75,000. Vehicle and equipment maintenance is $44,000 and compound maintenance is $40,000. The proposed budget for levy and grounds maintenance reflects a $17,000 increase from the amount budgeted in 22-23. Operating supplies of $420,000 includes electricity of $310,000 and petroleum products of $40,000. The budget is increasing by $65,000, which is almost entirely related to increases in electricity rates, which is, it's between 15 and 20% rate increases this year for electricity. Projects and planning of $611,000 includes houseless coordination of $106,000, environmental program costs of $116,000, OSHA fall protection projects of $95,000, flood risk modeling of $75,000, and improvements to the Vanport pump station of $48,000. Professional services of $399,000 includes legal services of $97,000. General engineering consulting services of $50,000, diversity and equity services of $57,000, and government relations of $55,000. Professional services have decreased $43,000 from fiscal year 22-23, mainly in the legal services area. Contracts and agreements include scheduled payment to the JCA of $155,000 and a new payment of $40,000 to the urban district to support communication and outreach. Administrative expenses of $634,000 includes $113,000 for liability insurance, $100,000 for security costs, $71,000 for software subscriptions, and $44,000 for technology maintenance and equipment. Administrative expenses are $38,000 lower than the fiscal year 22-23 budget. All right, moving on. These are our capital projects that are included in the proposed budget, and Bill will actually be presenting the capital improvement plan shortly, so I'm not going to spend much time here. What I will note, which is kind of unique, is that we do have our staff account for their time. So if they're actually working on a capital project, they'll account for their time, and that's included in the costs by project up above, but then we actually take that cost out and leave it in our personnel expenses from an accounting standpoint. So that's what that negative is. So we want to make sure that we're aware of the full cost of the project. And so we do include that staffing cost, but then we move it back so that we have it in personnel expense. That's kind of a governmental accounting thing. So that's what that negative is. Doesn't mean that we're making reductions. And this is a schedule of the summary of the PMLS project costs for the first 3 years of the project. We're currently anticipating that year 1 spending will occur in the current fiscal year, but it is entirely within the realm of possibility that we'll see those amounts shift to fiscal year 23-24, just because there are a lot of agreements to be sorted out. And so timing could shift that. We're only, believe it or not, 2 months away from the end of the fiscal year. And there's a lot to be done in order to make that payment happen in this year. In that case, we would be funding for the first 2 years of PMLS in fiscal year 23-24. And if we find that we're slipping towards that, you will see me make a change to your budget, and that will shift things from 1 year to the next. Doesn't change the ending fund balance because it would just carry forward into the upcoming year, but you might see a shift there. So this section here shows the total obligation to the Corps of Engineers for each of the first 3 years of the project. The federal share is 65% of the total cost, and the local match is 35%. The allocation of the local match is shared equally between the 4 districts. And each district is covering 80% of the local match with that OBDD grant, and the remainder of the local match is provided by the district, either with assessment revenues or capital reserves, or through funding support from local partners. And that is all I have. So I am going to stop sharing my screen. If you have more questions about the budget, I'm happy to answer those now. Or if you think of something the minute the meeting ends, please be sure to send an email to Bill and I, or to Jim and I, and we will pull together a Q&A document so that everyone on the board is aware of the questions and the answers.
Yeah, Lori, question for you on the debt, the bridge debt that we'll have to issue. Do we already have the line of credit lined up for that? And do we do that very often where we draw down and pay off the loan? Or is this the first in a while that we've done that?
This would be a first, and we do not have that lined up at this point. It's normally a process that would happen during the budget process for 24-25. So if we're still in the same position at this point next year, that's when I would be pulling the information together and sending out a request for bids from some local banks that do that sort of gap funding normally for government entities, and get the rate bids that they would give us for that interim financing. So this year wouldn't be the year that we would take a look at it. We would start to have those conversations at this time next year.
Given the credit, so a little bit of credit tightening with regional banks because of, you know, Signature Bank and a few other banks pulling back and the deposits being pulled. Any issues or concerns about their ability or wanting to issue debt to us, given our uncertainty and our new district we're funding?
I think there could be, is the answer. But it's a pretty normal process for local governments, and it's a pretty stable revenue source that pays it back with those assessment revenues. So that my experience is, even in like 2008, 2009, when there was some significant kind of pullback in bank funding, I didn't have challenges on the government borrowing side to get that interim financing. So I'm going to be hopeful that there would still be availability. What might be impacted is the interest rate, but we should be able to get the financing.
All right. Any
It may also be possible to approach some of our larger partner agencies too, but again, we are hopeful that we can wrangle an operating revenue mechanism in the early parts of the short session of the legislature next year and solve this problem.
Yeah, presentation nicely done, Lori. Any additional questions from the board?
Again, more time if something occurs to you, or if you have questions later that you think of, or you hear from someone else, please let us know and we will work hard to get you answers. There's
I guess
still time.
I am wondering what your thought is, Jim, about, okay, this year's tight, next year is going to be tighter. Hopefully in later years, we'll be on a different glide path. But for the next 2 years, let's say, does it make sense? Would it be wise to pull back on some of our capital improvements that don't have to be done? You know, for example, the trash rake over at Broadmoor, for example, you know, relatively expensive. Should we be pulling back on that and saying, you know what, let's push that out a couple of years? The roof on the office, you know, things like that, you know. Have you considered saying, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to get into a situation next year where we're saying, oh shit, you know, we got to cut back on a whole bunch of this stuff. I don't think that's going to happen, but what if it did? That would be really kind of catastrophic, as opposed to pulling back on some of that this year and next year to a lesser degree. Have you given any thought to that sort of approach, and what were your thoughts on it?
I'm going to answer that actually, Jim,
Please.
because
Okay, good. All right, thanks,
I
Mike.
can weigh in with the political view, but Lori, let's go.
yeah.
Thank you.
So if you look here, remember back to what I was talking about. The blue section is your operating funds. The green section is your capital funds. So if you can't, we're in a position right now where it doesn't help us to reduce capital spending to try to fund operations, because we have this big chunk of green money that can fund those capital projects and the little chunk of blue money that's available for operations. So you would continue to have the green chunk, but you couldn't spend it because it would be restricted for capital projects. So I think that Bill and his team have been very thoughtful about the timing of our capital projects. He'll talk more about the risk analysis and the evaluation that goes into when they have selected to do particular projects in each year. And we've had the trash rate that you mentioned, we actually had to defer into next year. And so I think there's some concern that we do need to be moving forward with that. But I did want to show my picture again so that you remember.
That answers my question. I'm only embarrassed that I wasn't on top of that. So that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah, color of money matters. And I would also say I would defer to Bill on the capital program, because some of them have really critical safety issues for our team and for the community. So we want to listen to our chief engineer and follow his advice on that. And I think that's why you see us holding a couple positions vacant. We're already taking steps to try and preserve cash. And I think you're going to see us continue to do that in order to maintain our operational status. I also believe that among our government partners, they're aware of our situation, and I feel confident that they'll have ways to support us in floating any loan that we may need in that time. And I remain somewhat optimistic that we have a path forward, and we can share a little bit more about that with you later or through the urban board. But I feel like we're getting some good traction from our partners. We are awaiting some additional analysis, but things look like we may have found a path forward. I can't commit to that yet, but it's looking reasonably good. So.
And Lori, that'll be a good transition to our next topic. But one last question on this budget is on the issue of compression. I think it's like a little over 900,000.
Yes.
Do we have an understanding of how much is that a percentage each year that compresses? So like it's 900,000 this year. Was it 800,000 last year? Do we know how that progresses, or is it just there's chunks that sometimes show up and then it depends on change of use or whatnot? Do we have an understanding of what causes that, or is it what I'm saying is it predictable?
Yes and no. So yes, in that there's a big piece of this right now that popped up in this fiscal year that's related to government-owned properties that the county is calling partially exempt. So the airport, for example, owns a parking garage that is partially leased out to private car rental companies. So the way the county has administered that has resulted in a huge number, almost a $400,000 increase this year in what they're calling compression. When we look at the detail behind it, and we've got, because we're doing the work on the urban district, we've got, I've got a spreadsheet that has over 300,000 lines on it. So I can look at each individual property and see what's happening to the compression, what's happening to the assessed value and the real market value of that property, so that you can start to look at the trending and what would impact compression. And we do have some legal questions about how they're administering the calculation of what they're calling compression on those government-owned properties. And so we're really looking into that. I'm assuming that those compression amounts are going to continue, but am hopeful that we're going to find a legal solution to that and be able to correct for that going forward. Some of our properties, like our private residences, tend to stay at the same percentage level. So we monitor the trends in the percent of compression and can apply that, which is what you were seeing me do with that calculation of assessments. That's how I come up with almost the $974,000 worth of compression. It's looking at those percentages and trending those out. But frankly, in reality, what happens is if we do a large increase in our assessment rate, we'll see our percentage go down a little bit, and we'll see everybody else, like the city of Portland, everybody else that has property taxes, their compression rate will go up a little bit because their property taxes only go up 3% a year. So if we increase ours, it's a weighted average allocation on each property for the compression. So if our rate increases faster than the property tax rate, then our compression rate should go down a little bit, but it's because we're hurting our local partners because we did a bigger increase in rate than what they're allowed. They're allowed a 3% each year under the state law for property tax. So that's a long-winded answer, but what I would say is that because of the volume of properties and the volume of assessments in MCDD, we see normally a pretty consistent trend on the percentage. So we use a percentage to estimate.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. That just educating myself, and hopefully that helps other board members of how it's calculated. And
it's a really complicated calculation, so
yeah,
it's interesting.
I would hate to do that calculation, to be honest with you. All right, we got to get moving. So the next, and thanks again, Lori. Good job on this. It's really helpful for us to understand the budget constraints that we're all facing and trying to manage. Next we have Bill Owen on talking about the 24 through 28 CIP presentation.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, all. Bill Owen, Chief Engineer at the district. I'm going to be talking about the capital improvement plan that was included in your meeting package today. It starts on page 36 for those who have that nearby. I don't have a presentation per se, but I want to do instead is walk through that document. It's not very long, at least the main body, and I'll point you to the appendices when you can dig in more detail. The purpose of today's agenda item here is just to get you introduced to the information in the package. There are two other opportunities for you all to look at this in more depth and ask questions. Next month, I'll be back to offer any changes or to highlight any changes that to this draft that you see today. And then at the June format meeting, similar to previous years, we'll offer the final polished version for your consideration and approval. So let me share my screen. Let me know when y'all can see that. All right.
We can see it.
Yeah, thank you. Again, it's on page 36 of your meeting package that Wendy sent you last week. The plan itself is 5 or 6 pages long, so not very long. And then there are the appendices similar to past years. It's organized the same as in previous years, so for many of you, it'll look familiar. It starts with the executive summary. The 5-year CIP is just over $22 million for this 5-year window, with an investment of $2.7 million for FY 23-24 next year. There's an introduction section that talks about the history of the district, some large properties, as well as an explanation of what this document entails. Similar to previous years, there's a description about the CIP development itself. It's 4 steps. The first step is to identify any potential projects. I've tried hard to get the district to a point where we only include information that's been vetted through some sort of thorough engineering planning assessment, so report. or some of our preventative maintenance tests on our pumps, for instance, or our motors. We do a vibration test on the motor, and we do tests on the ability that the motor won't get too hot, so that's a Megger test. And so is the insulation in the motor thick enough to allow it to operate properly? So we do those tests annually at least, and then we look at trend analysis and see whether or not any changes have to be done. Many times when that happens, it defaults to a repair if something happens. So you wouldn't see that in the CIP per se, but you would see it in the annual budget under the O&M, the materials and services section. Step 2, after we've identified each project, we apply a weighting method, a set of criteria to help prioritize projects. This is the first wave of trying to identify which projects have a need to be invested in earlier rather than later. So flood risk, emergency preparedness, operational efficiency and safety, asset integrity and dependability, are all factors that we consider. And there's a different document that goes into much more depth for staff on guidance on what do we consider for scores for each of these categories. And this board has opined and passed on the weights of each of those criteria relatively with each other. And I've retained those same weights here. Step 3 applies some additional criteria, recognizing those 4 categories doesn't capture the full gamut of value that these projects provide. And so you can see the list here of what things we also consider. We don't provide as much detail in our guidance to staff regarding how to score these. At this point, it's more of a yes, it provides this value, or no, the project does not provide this value. So in some cases, it could be on an equity side. Maybe it's a project that provides stormwater drainage for a lower income neighborhood. And so it would have a checkbox, at least, that provides more equity than maybe a project that doesn't have the same situation. Step 4 is, so we identify which projects added value criteria are a part of each project. And step 4 is combining steps 2 and 3, and that we start with the ranking from step 2 and adjust the project's ranking accordingly in step 3 by moving up a little bit, depending on if they have more of those check boxes from the step 3. I'll note that if any project has a regulatory compliance, we're out of compliance, or we're breaking the law in some manner, or there's a financial partnership that we have with another entity, those projects get moved to the top, just artificially. So regardless of the criteria prior to that. So same process as we've done past. And I know there's a lot of interest. I can't emphasize that enough about revisiting this criteria when the new urban district starts. And I look forward to that, because there will be many opportunities to make adjustments. And I'll make sure the board is engaged in that process. Last year, I added this section about cost estimates. I found that not just MCD, but other districts were put in a position where the board members were asked to increase project costs as the project moved along, and felt very uncomfortable for me. And in part, it was partly a recognition that the projects had started very early on. And for instance, they came out of our master plans, which are great documents as a starting point but there are planning efforts. And so because just inherently in that process, you don't have time to get into the site details per se. And as some of you know, you just have to do your best at the time, use some parametric guides to help you come up with a cost estimate for materials and mobilization and other fun things like that. And as a result, you come up with a pretty rough number. So when projects are at that stage, your accuracy of that cost estimate is pretty broad. So in this case, at class 5, it's anywhere from -50, so half the cost, up to double the cost of 100%. In this case, I assume that any projects that, it's not sorry, just me, but even the master plans that have been stamped have assumed a 50% increase to whatever number they come up with. So they come up with a number of $1 million, and they said, all right, for construction at least, we're going to add another 500,000. Because we just really haven't had the time to look into that project in detail. So that's a 50% increase, and that's common for master plans. As the project continues on and more information is included, then the accuracy ranges get tighter, which makes sense, right? So by the time at least you get to 30% design, for instance, you're at -20 plus 30 for your accuracy range. So and I believe I mentioned last year, and I'll continue doing, is my intent here is that you'll see, if you see a project with a class 5 number, what my intent is I want to get through the pre-design phase first. So that may be $100,000, and maybe a little more, maybe a little less. But at that point, we'll have a sort of a class 3 cost estimate that gives you a better sense on what your total construction cost is, which is where the big money is, right? That's 80% of the cost of a lot of times of a capital cost project, excuse me. So that will be a significant gateway for us as y'all decision to say, all right, the cost is now this. Is it appropriate for us to move forward? Or do we need to consider thinking about delaying this for a year or two, or whatever it might be, whatever the factors are at the time. The information you find in Appendix A in this document has those class numbers to give y'all some information to understand what maturity level these projects are in. The last section of the report deals with the highlights of the plan. This is an opportunity for us to explain how this version of a 5-year plan compares to the previous 5-year plan and a point of looking forward. It describes what projects are coming in that is composed of the $2.7 million. You'll note further down here that a lot of the big ticket items, except for the PMLS work, it's paid for by the waning year of your commercial loan that you took out 5 years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago. And so this next year is the last year we'll be able to pay for fund projects from that loan. So you see some big ticket items in there, including the trash rake, and actually the water line will have finished this year. But those are the 2 last big projects, similar to the pump replacement project for Pump Station 1. That's why some of those projects are in there. The 5-year outlook says $22 million. There's an increase of 9.6 from last year's CIP to come up with that 22 million. And I list a series of projects that explain why that increase has occurred. Some projects that have been identified in the master plan in the out years have now started trickling into our 5-year window. So the 181st pump station is an example of that. The FEMA accreditation projects, you might recall in past, I've put just placeholders into the CIP budget. This year is different. We tried to put in the full value of the project costs, so that's why there's a sizable increase. In fact, that makes up the majority of the 9 million plus. And that's just a reflection of that's the cost of the project. It doesn't indicate necessarily how it's going to be paid. So in this case, the JCA is a consortium of entities is helping to pay for the early phases of it. And there'll be hopefully bond revenue to pay for the remaining pieces. There are also projects like the Pump Station 2 capacity projects that will have moved in from the master plan list of recommendations. But in this case, Pump Station 2 is also part of the PMLS suite of projects. So if PMLS continues past PED, past the design phase and then construction, this line item will go away because it's duplicative at this point. Yeah, and there's more details in here about those. I'll make a comment about escalation as I've done in past years. It's kind of a crystal ball effort to try to determine how much prices are going to rise next year, and so I can't just judge it just based on the 4 walls of my office or my son's room, which I'm in right now in the house. So I look at I do some Google searching. I look at indices, nationwide indices, regional indices. I also reach out to my peers and other bureaus or other public agencies, whether it's a port, the cities, and so forth. Found that nationwide, at least, you're looking at least 5%, if not more, of increase. Lori already mentioned the CPI this last year that tracks a different suite of products, not necessarily the construction materials per se that the ENR indices might provide, but certainly as you start narrowing down to the West Coast, those prices seem to be higher than nationwide. And so what I'm proposing this year is the first year out projects, if it's appropriate, they are escalated by 7% from the previous year. And then subsequently, I drop it down 1%. So first year 7%, then 6%, then 5%, and then at 4% for year 4, and then through year 10, because 4% is closer to long-term historic average. Independently, I was pleased to hear that the port actually is using the same sequence. And so someone else, Lisa won't get the same Google pages that I was.
They stole it from you.
I'm sure that's the case, right? Somehow they hacked into my computer. Yeah, so the costs that you see in Appendix A, which is the sort of the meat of the documents, incorporates those escalation values. Again, there's a project number, there are project descriptions, the number itself internally, the ranking, the cost accuracy is what I referenced earlier, different classes depending on what maturity level the projects are in. I make some color commentary about the extended external funding, excuse me, and then there's a reference down below. And then the 5 individual years of the 5-year outlook, and then during the 10-year outlook, I give even a glimpse of what that is going to be. It's broken into construction projects, general construction projects. I lump the PMLS projects together. Note Pump Station 2, I mentioned earlier, is included in the PMLS, and so this line item will go away. It's total 7.2 million, right? So that's a chunk of change for over a 10-year period. But if the PMLS projects take care of it, then that's great. and that we don't need to have that duplicative line. You'll see that pump station 4 trash rakes are in here as well. We are working with the Corps of Engineers staff to get credit for this this investment, because it also was part of the PMLS projects, but we needed it faster than they could move. And so you have approved that sequence, and we have that project's now out to bid, and we will be coming to you next month with a request to consider the construction contractors cost, the selected contractors cost.
Bill, real quickly on that. Yeah, I recall approving that sequence, but I want to make sure that the sequence is approved by the Corps, that they approve that concept. I don't want us to accidentally spend the money and then the Corps say, "Oh, you should have asked us before," you know, or what am I saying? I want to make sure we're in line with the Corps on that sequencing of getting a credit from them.
Yeah, I would be too. I don't know if Collins is on. Yeah, I see his name on there. Colin, can you comment on that? Because you can explain that process a little better than I can.
Sure, I can do that, and Mark can fill in as well. But in general, all of the projects that have been identified in the recommended plan for PMLS are, they at least have the preliminary costs associated with them. And then the Corps has a process where we can do advanced work in kind. We issue a memo to them, basically get sign off for it. And it is credited later in the project. I think what is important here too to recognize is that this is work that is really vital for the operations of Pump Station 4 and for the efficiency of our operations staff. So this is work that was going to be done, but we're able to have it identified in the PMLS project to get credit later on. And that's really the paperwork that we're currently doing. Jim is issuing a letter to Colonel Hilton, who is the colonel in charge at Portland District. And so we'll have all that credit paperwork.
That's all I'm getting. You said we need to issue a memo and they need to sign off on it. I want to make sure they sign off on it before we sign the contract.
And Mark is, let me know if I stepped in or misstepped there.
No, no, that's all correct. And we submitted the memo already. Jim signed it, and we're expecting to get any feedback on that next week. So we'll have that in plenty of time.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we don't do a $1 million bad timing, doing the memo a month too late sort of thing. Yes.
Right. Unfortunately, we had to pay, or we had to sign a contract with the equipment provider earlier. That was back in November, I think it was. I have to go back into the board meeting minutes, but you've approved that already. We needed to do that early because of the lead time to get that equipment in by this summer. We've included that cost in this memo to the Corps. We've only paid 10% of that total contract so far, so we're hoping the Corps is amenable to include the rest of that at least in our credit. So we're doing the best we can to get that credit.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, and just to round out with the complementary perspective, like of course, like if that is the right risk-informed decision to move at that time, prudent decision above all else. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that observation. Right, so let me just, I'm almost done here. So PMLS work, some other planning processes. We've it feels maybe a little surprising to some, but we're almost to the point of needing another facilities master plan. It's been 10 years, almost 10 years since we started that process. And so what we're proposing to do is start that again next year. We'll see what happens over the course of the year, whether or not we'll continue that, but that's coming. And finally, some equipment replacements, vehicle and equipment needs. The number for next year was bigger than we had before, and so we've deferred particularly the case excavator at least 1 year. That's on our operations team's needs. But so I'm going to be looking this year, hopefully, to see what opportunities we can get maybe for some grants to do that. Similarly with the portable generator. So that's Appendix A. Then Appendix B has the individual project summary sheets, and there are a lot. So they're like 30 or so. So by the time you have an opportunity to glance through those, certainly give me any questions, certainly give me a buzz and to ask for any clarifications. So that's a quick overview of the CIP, the 5-year CIP, and I'm happy to answer questions. Other questions now. Again, you'll see another version next month, and the final version for your consideration for approval in the June format.
Any questions for Bill?
Chair, if I may, just a shout out to the engineering, project management, and planning teams, along with finance and legal, who are right there with them, making all this work move forward. It's a lot of work, and they're doing a great job. So thank you, team.
Yep, it definitely was a village to put this together.
Yeah, good work. Good work, Bill and team. Appreciate you giving us an update. Going to move forward with a flood safety Columbia River overview with Aster.
Hi, my name is Aster Moulton. I'm the Public Affairs and Community Relations Specialist with the Drainage Districts, and I'm here to give you an overview of the Flood Safe Columbia River initiative, which is meant to raise broad regional awareness about the importance of the flood safety system along the Columbia River, and to describe in a simple and compelling way the various efforts to upgrade this infrastructure and improve management of the system. Staff has worked closely with communications consultants to help refine this initiative and the key messages that will help this topic resonate with the broader public. Next slide. So I will go over some of the background material, some of the polling and focus groups that helped us to arrive at Flood Safe Columbia River. I'll go over what our key messages are for this initiative and the supporting data, and how this initiative will help us develop and refine a geobond. Next slide. So we did some opinion research to help shape this initiative. We did polling last summer for voters within the urban Multnomah County, the boundaries of the new district. We had a sample size of 660 with an overrepresentation of voters of color, and that helped us refine some of our initial ideas around messaging, and that messaging was then tested and refined again through focus groups. We had 4 focus groups of registered voters within urban Multnomah County. The first group was residents on the west side of the Willamette River. We had a focus group with residents on the east side of the Willamette River, a focus group with lower income residents, and then a focus group with property owners. And we did focus on people located outside of the managed floodplain to try to get a sense of regional awareness and support of the flood safety system. Next slide. So the name Flood Safe Columbia River was loosely adapted from Levee Ready Columbia. We replaced Levee Ready with Flood Safe to avoid technical words. Not everyone knows what a levee is, and to be a little bit more descriptive. And we also added the word river to further refine the geography. We presented a lot of different logos in the focus groups, logo options, and this was the one that resonated with the most people. People really liked the water drop shape and the reference to Mount Hood and natural assets, and also some of the infrastructure that you can find along the Columbia River. This is our tagline for the initiative: protecting communities and improving the natural environment in a changing climate. And as you'll see, we selected these words very intentionally to connect with people's values and motivations throughout the region. Next slide. So Flood Safe Columbia River is meant to be an umbrella initiative that represents the simultaneous and interrelated efforts of everything going on to improve our infrastructure, the U.S. Army Corps project, the ongoing work of the drainage districts, the work of the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, and the ongoing work of Levee Ready Columbia. And it describes this word in a simple narrative that focuses on the overarching problems and solutions rather than getting bogged down in which agency is doing what. The idea is to brand this work in a collective and cohesive way, rather than trying to navigate this web in the public narrative. Next slide. So one of our key findings from the polling is that there's very low awareness of the risk of flooding in the region, especially along the Columbia River. And when you ask people how concerned they are about different human-made and natural disasters in the region, flooding is at the bottom of what people are concerned about. But you'll notice that climate change-driven extreme weather events is at the top. And we know that there's an inextricable link between increased risk of flooding and climate change. And so what this initiative tries to do is make that connection for people, draw a connection between climate change and increased flood risk to help pique some interest in this topic.
Esther, should I ask a question now or wait till the end?
You can ask a question now.
Just on the timing of this, was this before or after some events happen in California?
That's a great question. So this is before those events happened in California. This was last June. And so, I think something that we want to highlight in our messaging is, which you'll see as I continue in the presentation, is that these flood risks are happening in other places, and they've happened here before, and they can happen here again. So part of our strategy is highlighting the different events that are ongoing in other places and drawing a connection between those and what can happen in our region.
Thanks.
Esther, before you dive into the key messages, could you explain that the research was based on broad voters and general public, and that we know that there are some different audiences that might require slightly different focus? If you could address that, I think it'll help the board understand where we're headed here.
Yeah, so we tested the polling, and the focus groups were based on, collecting insight from a broad audience, from voters in urban Multnomah County that we will ultimately be asking to support these investments. And so our high level key messages are aimed towards that audience. And we know that there's, we can develop more targeted messaging towards the business community, towards communities of color, people who speak different languages, but these are kind of the broad messages that will resonate with the most people throughout the region. So our top line messages are: major floods are increasing with climate change, and the Portland region is at risk. Flooding could be devastating to vulnerable communities, water quality, and the environment. And fortunately, there is a straightforward solution. And each of these messages have sub-messages, which I will go through in the following slides. So number one, major floods are increasing with climate change, and the Portland region is at risk. It's happened here before and will happen again. And this is in specific reference to Vanport. A lot of people in the region do know about Vanport now, due to a lot of really great educational campaigns over the past decade. And we found through the focus groups that images of Vanport are really compelling, but they're all black and white and they feel like a long time ago. So it will happen again, is bringing that risk to the present time. And also tied to this message is, which is not listed here, is that flood risk is happening in other places as well. Our next message here is the Columbia is one of the world's largest, most powerful rivers. We learned in focus groups that people in the Portland region are more oriented towards the Willamette. When we asked people if they were more concerned about flooding in the Willamette or the Columbia, people always focus their attention on the Willamette. So this line is trying to help people remember that the Columbia River, even though it's on the edge of Multnomah County, it's still there. It's still a huge river, and that's actually where the greatest flood risk is. And then third, we no longer meet federal standards for flood protection. This was really motivating for people in the focus groups because people tend to think of federal standards as the bare minimum. Next slide. So flooding could be devastating to vulnerable communities, water quality, and the environment. People in the focus group, system of flood control infrastructure hidden in plain sight protects our region from major disasters. People in the focus groups really liked the term hidden in plain sight because it validated their experience of, maybe they've been to the Columbia River before and haven't noticed the flood protection system. If you don't know what a levee is, it can look like a series of hills. So that helped people realize that even though they might not have ever seen the system, it does exist. It's nearly 100 years old and requires urgent upgrades. We tested different action words in the focus groups. We tested the word repair, modernize, improve, upgrade, and the words upgrade and improve really resonated with folks. The word repair feels like we're not quite doing enough, and the word modernize feels too expensive and maybe superficial. So we want to, when we talk about what we're doing to the infrastructure, we want to say we're improving it or upgrading it. And then toxins, raw sewage, and other hazardous materials could pollute rivers, streams, and drinking water. We found through our polling that people are motivated by environmental impacts, so we wanted to highlight those here. And then 8,000 residents, 60,000 workers, and 75% of the region's businesses would feel the impacts. These statistics were helpful for people. A lot of people don't know that there are residential communities that are right along the Columbia River. So this highlights that. And this also highlights the fact that a devastating flood in this area would impact people all throughout the region who rely on this area for their job and for the distribution of a lot of goods and services. Next slide. So fortunately, there is a straightforward solution. The idea that there's a simple, cost-effective, straightforward solution was really compelling in our focus groups. A lot of people were really worried that this would be another huge infrastructure project with a million alternatives, with planning that's drawn out for decades. And when we told people that the reason why our initial estimates of the costs were so low compared to other regional infrastructure projects that they might be aware of, it's because our improvements are fairly simple, like raising a levee by a foot or two, and relatively inexpensive. That was really compelling for people. So the idea is that a small investment goes a long way. And then simple, cost-effective engineering solutions will protect lives, homes, environmental quality, and save millions of dollars in disaster recovery. This preventative aspect was also really motivating for people. And we also want to highlight our nature-based solutions and how those can reduce the risk of major floods. This is Portland, and people like the sound of nature-based solutions, even if they don't quite understand what that means. Portland and the surrounding area. And the fact that there's also a match from the federal government was also compelling. Next slide. So Flood Safe Columbia River is the initiative we'll bring to the public in an ongoing way starting this spring and summer to help raise broad awareness. through events and communication tools, as well as refining a geo bond that the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District Board will refer to voters for a 2024 election. And right now we're collecting some initial board feedback before we start engaging people specifically about the geo bond, but we are starting some broader educational efforts. We have our first Flood Safe Columbia River webinar tomorrow in partnership with the Watershed Council, for instance. So we are getting going on implementing this initiative. And one more note about the bond and how you all might interact with it. After the bond measure is referred, there are certain limitations that government staff and representatives have when talking about the measure. We can't campaign directly and say, vote yes or no on this during working hours, and we have to use messages that are approved by the Secretary of State when delivering more educational information. And we'll have a training on all that when the time comes. Next slide. So the good news is that from our initial polling, we found that there is broad support for making needed investments at around 66%. But you'll see that 44 out of that 66 say that they somewhat support the effort. Next slide. So the better news is that after people hear some of the messaging, total support shifts from 66% to 72%, and most significantly, that strong support shifts from 23% to 40%. So that's a pretty solid base. Next slide.
And I'll just chime in here, having worked on a fair number of bond measures, that these are really good starting numbers. We're well into the zone where political consultants would say, yes, this is doable. So I just want to share that with you based on my experience at TriMet and City of Portland and Metro. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And I think, how you saw that increase in support, that helps demonstrate the importance of messaging and clear communication when talking about this issue. So my final slide is on message discipline. So the messages are more effective when they come from trusted messengers. People in the focus groups found videos of Ed Washington talking about this issue and an environmental advocate really compelling. They also find flood safety engineers compelling as well as the technical experts, but they're more skeptical of general government staff and elected officials. And we want to avoid conflicting narratives. The more we talk about the various entities and try to use different message templates, the more the point gets lost. So we do want to stay consistent in our messaging. And then my final point is shape the narrative, don't let it shape you. We want to be strong leaders in how this message gets talked about in the public realm. Once you bring an initiative public, especially if there's if it's tied to a bond measure, there are a lot of different public opinion sources, a lot of different media sources that might say things that conflict with your own messaging. So it's better to come out really strong with a discrete list of messages and stay consistent rather than try to respond to conflicting narratives. So I think the more grounded we can be in these tested messages, the better. And that is all I had for you. Our website is up at floodsafecolumbia.org, so you can visit that site to learn more information, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah.
Corky?
Got a couple of points. First of all, really nice polling. That's very encouraging. I've got a couple of suggestions, but I would also say to use the boards. The boards have a lot of experience conveying a lot of these messages to the public. You did a good job of doing some focus groups and talking about people, but the boards have a more precise knowledge about, drainage district messages to the public. So I don't take my word for some of my suggestions. go to the other boards to get from them. On the first messaging slide, that number 1 slide, I would, let's see, can you pull that up real quick? Is that possible? Oh, the part where it said we no longer meet federal standards for flood protection. My suggestion is tweak that a little bit to something more along the lines of federal standards have increased and we want to stay current with that. In other words, I'm trying to avoid kind of like what you just said at the end there, you want to convey the message, you want to write that message rather than somebody else write. It kind of sounds like, oh my goodness, we've fallen behind. That's not really the case. The case is the federal standards have increased for good reason, and we need to implement some improvements for it. So my suggestion is think about tweaking that last one there. On the number 2 slide, similar thing where you talk about urgent upgrades. I'd probably maybe drop the word urgent or something like that, because again, to me, it sounds like we screwed up. And now we're ready, because remember, you were saying yourself, the public is sensitive to and skeptical of government being inefficient in getting the job done. And when you say, oh, we've got urgent upgrades, it sounds like the same old story of, oh, we blew it. Now we got to spend a whole bunch of money to catch up. Again, that's not the true case here. So I worry about that use of that word in that place. In other words, we want to convey as being more intentional. This is something we've been planning. This is something that's good for us. And then going to that 3rd slide, rather than just saying $100 million from feds, I don't remember exactly what it said, but saying, 2/3 is coming from the feds. That's getting into that. We're being very intentional. We put a lot of work into that, and we're very proud of the fact that we got the feds paying 2/3 of the cost of this. I want to brag about that. Why are the feds paying 2/3? Because they believe in us, because they think we've done a good job, and these aren't urgent emergency, fixes. This is something they trust us, and they've given us more money. So let's convey that. Let's brag about it, and let's get that across to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's some really great feedback, Corky.
And they're all minor tweaks, but they might be important ones. So yeah.
Thank you, Corky.
Thanks.
That was a good positive boost. I'm grateful.
I would just add one thing. It was interesting to me to hear how flood risk ranks so lowly amongst the general sort of awareness of risks from natural disasters that we face in this area. And I guess in one way of thinking about that is that means that our organization and our infrastructure has been successful for a long time. And that's really good to hear. It also means that the hydroelectric system has tamed the Columbia River in ways it never had before. But I think, we also are doing a good job of keeping that risk out of people's minds, which is exactly where you want that risk, except for the people that are, whose job it is to worry about it. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's something we recognized as well.
I guess the last thing that I want to ensure this board is that we have a lot more work to do with the urban board before we're ready to settle on what the exact package of projects is. We gave them a really high level overview, and then last week we gave them a little bit more detail, but I just really want to stress we have a lot more work to do with them to get to a place where I can really feel like they understand what we're proposing and can support it. So just on behalf of the urban board, we only have one member here today. I want to assure you that we recognize that we don't have the appropriate work done with the board yet to say this is what it's going to look like, but we're doing that work, and the board's given us good feedback. So more to come on that, and several more conversations with them before this really gets settled. And hopefully by the end of the summer, early fall, we'll be pretty close. And then, Kenzie, to your comment, we plan to do another round of polling and focus groups to finish up the way we want to talk about this and to really make sure we're in the zone of voter support. First and foremost, in the zone of protecting the community and performing our mission, but doing that in a way that is consistent with voters' attitudes.
Thanks, Jim. Just adding a couple thoughts, if I could. So I deal with risk management as part of my day job, and often I'm having a heart-to-heart with people about the difference of communicating performance issues versus increased risk levels, because increased risk levels does not necessarily have anything to do with previous performance. Like the state of the world has changed, and therefore the risk is elevated, and that needs to be communicated with urgency or whatever the appropriate word is. So I would just say, let's give it a second thought about like shying away from that strong language. Oh, and I also, was drawn to that one point about federal standards that you were, Corky. And just curious, the whole concept of Katrina changed everything. I'm curious, if we would consider including something like that or testing something like that in the messaging.
Yeah, I would say, when I have talked about the increase in federal standards during presentations and community meetings, I always reference Katrina, and I think we'll continue to want to reference Katrina as part of this messaging. We weren't able to include all the words and what we might say to the public, but that's definitely a piece of it.
And by the way, I agree with that, and that idea of like using a word urgent in the context of, hey, climate change is here. The situation around us has changed dramatically. We need to urgently address that. Yeah, that gets away from the potential implication that we messed up, everything's gone to kaput, and now we urgently need to fix it. That's what I'm trying to avoid, is that even if that's not what you wrote down, that might be what people think, and we want to avoid that sort of problem. Last thought, maybe, and this can be dealt with later, but something that popped in my mind the other day too is, we've had enormous tax increases in just the past few years. So and right now we've got this tax measure on the ballot coming up that a lot of people are actually, I think all elected officials are against it. I'm worried, and what I've been saying to other people is like, okay, yeah, we're very much against this. At the same time, a year from now, I'm going to be coming to you with, please support this. So I'm wondering if we should soon, in the coming months, maybe engage in a conversation with Portland Business Alliance, for example, and others, and start laying the seeds for that ballot measure next spring, so that they're ready to go to help us and support that if we start talking about it now, rather than going to their support, in February.
Yeah, absolutely. And our consultants have already had some initial conversations with PBA and other members of the business community. And actually, their response is, this sounds like a necessary thing. We understand it. We're not going to push back against it. And as we do our education and engagement efforts this summer, we definitely want to circle back with the business community, because we'll have more details to share.
Great, thanks.
I did make an initial contact with Business for a Better Portland, and Esther's helping me follow up to see how we can work with their membership. And Corky, I've been reaching out to some of your board members just to have a personal coffee to start to remind them, hey, this is coming, give us feedback. I met with Heister Yale, I met with Diversified Marine, some of the other larger landowners, just to start to say, hello, we're here.
Let's make this an easy, boring conversation.
Ideally, that'll be there. And I think it's also important for us to remember the importance of cost containment and being realistic about how we go forward. So we're also trying to be mindful of the total cost as well. The last piece that we're working on, and the urban board will begin to see this shortly. Lori, help me out here. I think May 8th. We do have a database that's starting to look at what people pay today and what they could pay under different scenarios, including under a scenario with the loss of accreditation. So for each R number, every property in the district, we have some idea of what some of the impacts could be. So we're gearing that up to remind people that yes, it may be more money, but it's less more money than it would be otherwise. Not the easiest message to send, but this is less than worst case.
Be sure and look up Milton Freewater too. There's a great and relatively recent example of somebody said, you know what, we're going to not get accredited. We can save money. And then I think in a year later, they went, oh, oops, so it's a good example. Like, look, and then it's not us, it's somebody else. We say, and they blew it, and they know they blew it. They admit it. So that might be a good one to use.
I think that the other concern that I've heard around the bond measure is, well, what if the feds don't come through? And one of the things that I think is an important message as we transition to Armand's presentation on the update on the PMLS is that we do know, based on the US-Canada treaty, that one of the reasons Congress and the Corps are excited about our project is it does give them a stronger position in the negotiations with Canada, because they've made the flood safety investments here. This is the largest urban area in the entire Columbia Basin. We're taking care of our stuff. So therefore, you can't leverage that as something to work against it. So we believe that there's a long-term significant international interest in the Congress and the Corps in supporting federal funding for our program. Colin, check me if I'm wrong here, but.
Nope, that's correct. And also, just as a note, we're in a better position for CRT. The hydrologic, the analysis that was done for PMLS also shows our highest risk is because of climate change, to Kenzie's point, and our greatest risk is rain on snow events. So it's actually for the events that the flood control dam systems upriver actually can't really do anything about. And so that kind of sharp increase in risk is one of the main reasons to invest, but also they're able to have a stronger negotiating position with these shored up.
And then, Mr. Chair, if I may, given time, I'm happy to forego the executive session time. Ken, you and I are speaking regularly. I'm happy to stay late, but I want to give the board space to hear from Armand, because I think what he has to say is very important business for the board's consideration. So I'm happy to accommodate the board's needs in whatever way is best for the board.
Yeah, I think it's important that we touch base with
Okay.
you. I'm hoping the board can stay for at least 10 minutes after, but if we could get Armand, get onto that agenda item right now, that'd be great.
All right, thanks, everyone.
And Armand, in the interest of time, why don't you just jump right into it? I was just going to give a quick overview of where we are, and I can send that as an email to the board.
That sounds great. Thanks, Colin. And thank you, board. I know we're past time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's calendars. I'll be very brief. Actually, I should say Armand Resto-Spots, MCDD Associate District Counsel. I'll be brief. This is quite a lot of information to digest collectively in this meeting, and then I'm going to add a lot more information for you. But I want to just clarify everything I'm talking to you about in these last few minutes. It's in your packet in my memorandum, and the way that I've laid that memo out is to just provide you a roadmap, an overview of where we are heading into the PMLS design process. And this is really, staff believe this would be a prime opportunity to brief all the boards about what the next couple months are going to look like, so that when we start presenting some actionable items on the design phase, your questions have been answered, and you have kind of seen what's coming down the pipeline. So PMLS design phase. You've heard quite a bit about this the last few meetings. Currently, we are awaiting a final design agreement from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That can be seen as sort of a master overarching contract. It'll provide the terms, conditions, and obligations of the design phase work. And most importantly, it'll be defining and identifying, I should say, our local share of the design costs. In my memorandum, which is in your packet, I've included the working draft of the most up-to-date draft of that design agreement. And then we also have a cost allocation schedule that aligns with the budget you had seen earlier with Lori's presentation. Before signing that agreement, there's going to be some actionable steps that we need to do. All the legacy districts will need to take to get there. So I've identified at least 4. There's sort of a quasi 5th step, and I ordered those chronologically, but in reality, these will probably be happening concurrently, possibly at the same meeting or at subsequent meetings. It's just a process. So one way you can look at the next steps for us as a funding component and then a legal component. So if we start with the funding component, if you recall, I believe about 2 meetings ago or so, Colin had briefed the board about the Business Oregon levy grant awards that each district was awarded. If you recall, as local sponsor, the districts will be responsible for a 35% cost share or a match on the design phase to the federal government's 65%. Those business Oregon grant funds collectively will represent 80% of our local share. So these are really important grant funds. They are currently with the state agency with their legal counsel, and they are providing for a minor amendment that has been requested on our behalf for providing a term for the dissolution process that we are anticipating happening in the next couple of years. We're expecting those contracts with that minor revision any moment, any day now. And when we have those, that'll be the very first thing that comes back to these boards for review and approval. With that funding secured, the next funding piece will be a cost-sharing intergovernmental agreement. If the boards recall, if members were here at the time, in February of 2022, thanks, Ken. In 2022, all of the boards agreed to share equally in financing this design phase upon two conditions. One condition was receiving the State of Oregon Business Oregon grant funds. And then the second condition was entering into a cost share arrangement. So that cost share arrangement will be under the terms of an IGA, and we'll provide the process for how each district will have money come in, how they'll share that money, and then eventually how that money will move its way to the core under that design agreement. Concurrently with that, there are the legal pieces. So that's the funding component. The legal part of this will be involves the Joint Contracting Authority, the JCA. So as with prior agreements with the Army Corps, the feasibility study in 2018, real estate planning assistance in 2020, the districts have used the Joint Contracting Authority as the non-federal sponsor to act on behalf of the legacy districts. This, practically speaking, this makes a lot of sense. So we don't have to contract individually with each district as a non-federal sponsor. And the PMLS is a system-wide project. So with those collective benefits to all the districts, the entire system, we're going to be again recommending that the JCA act as the local sponsor. And in practical terms, all that means is that the JCA will be the signing entity. So they will be the party on the actual design agreement. So to allow them, or for the JCA to have that authority to do so, we'll be presenting resolutions for each board to consider, where the boards will assign their respective authority over to the JCA to sign that agreement. So essentially, every district board will be able to look at that design agreement, have your questions, concerns answered, and say, great, JCA, you have, we're giving you the requisite authority to sign on our behalf. With every district doing that, JCA would then have their own resolution proposed where they would accept those assignments and that they would approve the design agreement, essentially authorizing ED, Executive Director Jim, here to sign that agreement. With that, the design process would be underway. We anticipate all of that happening. Some of it maybe at next meeting, some of it in maybe our June session, but here in the next couple of months. So that's a lot, and trust that we're working through all the complexities of that and trying to line this up as cleanly and efficiently as possible for this board's consideration. Happy to answer any questions on process, and please do refer back to the memo. It has all of it in there for you, but that's all I have, unless there's questions, and I'll defer back to Colin if there's anything I missed.
Board have any questions?
Yeah, and I know it's in the memo, but I'm hoping, Armand, you can just give it to me in quick, plain speak. If each of the legacy boards gives JCA the authority, I guess where does it begin and end, really? Because I think if we're assigning authority to act as the fiscal agent for specific actions, great, no problem. Let's go forward. But if it's assigning more authority for JCA to make decisions in the future, then you may have some pushback from some of the legacy districts.
Yeah, thanks, Corky. I'm not sure your specific question there. I will say that the assignment of authority will be fairly narrow. As every district, as part of that resolution, we'll actually include the design agreement itself, and we'll include language to the effect that MCDD is assigning the authority to the JCA to execute the design agreement as attached or in significantly, form or substance.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Any other questions? All right. Thanks, Armand, and thanks for the board for sticking around here. I believe that is it for our rest of our main agenda. We do have an executive session that we will need to go into. And so if we can excuse staff and Wendy, I think you have to turn the closed captioning on or something, but turn off the recording. And
I'm going to stay on until you read the
That's
the
right.
magic language, Ken.
I just want to say thank you for your time. Take care.
All right. We've got the board will meet in executive session to discuss employee performance, ORS 192.6602I. And now we're in executive session.
And I'm just going to make Jim the host and stop the recording. Whoops. Uh-oh. Now, Jim, you've got to stop the recording because I gave away permission.
I don't know that I've ever done that. Let's see.
So go to record and